Let's see if we're doing this correctly. Okay. So, first, I just want to welcome you and thank you for just all of your hard work and your commitment to just Black history, to the Institute. We really appreciate your partnership. The top 10 hip hop films of all time, um, Mobile Museum and Movie Festival was absolutely amazing. And it was unprecedented. And it really brought a lot of positive energy to our campus. So I just want to thank you right now for your vision.
You're welcome. It was awesome from the pictures I saw, and it was awesome when I had the chance to come and see Champtown and the undocumented story of hip hop in Detroit.
It was, yes, it was a great time. It was a great time. So let's just go ahead and get started. Just tell us, let's just share with everyone a little bit more about you and about your history and kind of what got you to this point.
Sure. I was born and raised in Detroit on the northwest side of Detroit. A graduate of Mumford High School, graduate of Ferris State University. But going back to my high school years, I grew up in what we call the golden era of hip hop. And so hip hop culture very much was my lens and my experience into getting me where I am today. So I grew up in high school with a lot of artists who ended up becoming very influential. People like Gabe Gonzalez, who was a part of P Funk, George Clinton's P Funk Funkadelic. Another hip hop artist by the name of Frogger D, who was an icon, an incredible freestyler who was popular and ended up doing some work with George Clinton. Another guy by the name of Dice, who was really popular as well in Detroit. J to the D, who was also one of the pioneers in Detroit, but also just been influenced by artists who really made it big. Someone like Awesome Dre, who was very popular in the mid to late '80s, who ended up touring with Public Enemy, and some other artists. And I think he was probably the first Detroit artist to get press in like The Source and Word Up magazine and those types of magazines. So, but just growing up in a very um, memorable time in Detroit, where hip hop was just really getting started uh, um, on a national level. So our first experience listening to Run DMC or the Sugar Hill Gang or Shy Rock, we got those songs through the late night mix on different radio stations in Detroit. So yeah, I just grew up in that era, and also hip hop was my introduction to Black history and culture on a deeper level. So it was groups like KRS-One, his Boogie Down Productions group. It was Public Enemy, who through their music dropped historical names that as our generation we went and researched. So a lot of people didn't know about Malcolm X on the level that we know of him now, because Malcolm X wasn't really talked about in the '80s on a large level. It wasn't until KRS-One put out By All Means Necessary with Malcolm X. He recreated the iconic photograph of Malcolm X on his album cover. So a lot of us started researching Malcolm after seeing that album cover. So I read the autobiography of Malcolm X probably when I was 18 from cover to cover, not because the teacher gave it to me or suggested it, but because of hip hop. All right. So, and then it was after that Spike Lee made the movie in the early '90s, and but it was hip hop that raised the visibility and the legacy of Malcolm X. And a lot of people don't know that, but it was hip hop that got me into learning more about Black history on a deeper level. And then when I became a student at Ferris State, I took an intro to sociology class with Dr. David Pilgrim, who a lot of people know as the founder of the Jim Crow Museum of Racist Memorabilia. And it was in his class that I started looking at Black history on an even deeper level and looking at how the imagery and the history of racist imagery, as well as how that impacted laws, how it impacted where people could live, where people can go to school, and all those different nuances of race and image and how that impacted people's experiences historically in America and throughout the globe. So I started collecting after taking his class, and then over time, I became a Detroit public school teacher. And then within that context, I use primary source material to start teaching and engaging my students. And some of those things that were not being included in the textbooks and the curriculum in the public school system. And then eventually I decided to do the museum full time. I took this collection that I was using in my classroom and started sharing it in public spaces locally in Detroit early on. This was probably in 1990. Well, it was in 1995, right after I came back from the Million Man March.
Okay.
And, I started sharing that in public spaces, and it kind of grew from there. And I started getting invites to go to different churches and different libraries, and eventually colleges. And over time, it just kind of spread, and um, I'm here now. In 2011. I left to do the museum full time. I left teaching in Detroit public schools. I taught middle school for 13 years, and then decided to do the museum full time. In 2011, I got accepted to Western Michigan University in the graduate program for my master's degree, and came here and really enjoyed myself in the program and fell in love in the community with the community. And so stayed here for 3 years, which opened the door for me to pursue my PhD at the University of Illinois. And I went to Champaign for 3.5 years. And then my wife and I decided that Kalamazoo would be a great place to plant our roots. And so we came back here, and we've been here ever since. So we've been here for about 3 years now.
That is fantastic. Of
That's a
course,
lot of that's
Kalamazoo
information.
is one of those places where once you get here, you just cannot seem to leave.
Yeah, yeah. Even on snowy days like this in the middle of April.
Yes, yes. Welcome to sweet Michigan. But wow, I mean, you have such a powerful history, and I appreciate your being able to connect it to key events and seeing the connection that hip hop has to so much of culture, like our American culture and our global culture has evolved over time. I continue to be in awe. And when you grew up in Detroit and especially in the late 80s, early 90s, I would be remiss if I didn't ask, were you anywhere near the Cobo Center when NWA performed their historic performance in Detroit?
I was not there for that show, but I did see them at, was it Cobo? No, I saw them at Joe Louis Arena, which is right next door to them. So my first major hip hop concert was in, it must have been in '88. It was a great lineup. It was Public Enemy, it was their Bring the Noise tour. Public Enemy, Ice T, EPMD, Rakim, NWA featured Easy. That was my first major show. So I did get a chance to see them on a major stage with a major tour. Um, so yeah, but I wasn't there for that one in particular.
Wow, but still, that was a lineup. I mean,
Oh yeah,
Rakim is one of the deepest lyricists that
absolutely.
that we can credit in the hip hop culture. And thinking that you had a chance to see Public Enemy, Rakim. I mean, even NWA. I mean, they made you think. It may
Right.
not have been using the language that your mama would have been proud of, but they made you think.
Absolutely,
Now,
yeah.
wow. So, um, again, I have to keep thanking you because my personal journey through and with hip hop, even though I grew up in the 70s, 80s, 90s, really came into my own high school, college in the 90s. Um, I'm access to hip hop, but I have to say I'm a very new student of hip
Hmm.
hop. And I'm a student of hip hop now because of you and because of your work. And I appreciate that because it's opened up some doors for me that I just didn't even realize. And so I have to thank you for constantly bringing content and knowledge causes anyone to interact with you and your exhibits to want to learn more. That's
Oh,
huge.
thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So another aspect of that too, which I failed to mention, which is a major part of it, is that so not only did I participate in the culture as a fan, but also as an entrepreneur. And so I as a student at Ferris State, I was on the student programming board, and we would bring in different artists to campus. So subsequently, I ended up becoming a booking agent and a manager for different artists because I became um, well equipped in terms of building a skill set of negotiating contracts, working with different booking agencies, and doing those things on campus at Ferris. And so I mean I never thought about it at the time, but I was building the skill set over time. So I was a part of a poetry collective in at Ferris. It was called Third Stone from the Sun. It was one poet and then three musicians. I played the drums for them, played the congas for them. And what we were doing essentially were we were imitating this group called the Last Poets. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them or not,
Mhm.
but the Last Poets will be considered the forefathers of hip hop. They were out of the Black arts movements, late '60s, early '70s in New York City. And we were touring around different places in Detroit and around the Midwest, and we met this woman who's a phenomenal poet. Her name is Vivi Francis, and she recognized what we were doing, and she saw the vibe that we had, and she was friends with the Last Poets, and she ended up introducing us to the Last Poets, and it was at that time that I realized that I wasn't as great of a drummer as I was. And I was like, so when you have one of your mentees or one of your mentors and one of your icons that you've been studying come see you, and they enjoy it, but I also played up against some other drummers, and they were just like, yeah, and I was just like, yeah, I know I'm not a great drummer, but I was booking all the shows for the group, so they couldn't say, well, we can't have Khalid. Um, so so I was the guy who was booking the shows. But after meeting Umar, um, that relationship, Umar from the Last Poets, that ended up creating a relationship where I was booking shows for the Last Poets. So booking shows for the Last Poets, eventually did some managing for them as well. But it was through that relationship that I ended up meeting hip hop artists from Detroit in the mid '90s. So there was one hip hop artist from Detroit that everybody knew, and his name was Proof. And so I ended up meeting him in about '96, '97. And he told me that he needed management for his group, which was called Five Elements. And so I ended up doing management for them. And then eventually that just opened up a whole new world, um, because right after I started managing them, one of Proof's best friends ended up signing a huge record deal with Dr. Dre, and his name was Eminem. So that just opened up a whole new world for a lot of hip hop artists in Detroit, and created a lane for me down the road, um, for me to travel overseas and do tours with Proof, who was actually the founding member of the group D12, which Eminem comes out of, and
Mhm.
Mekhi Phifer played Proof in the movie 8 Mile, as you know. But yeah, so that just created a whole new lane for me as an entrepreneur as well. So early on, I probably played a lot of different roles in terms of entrepreneurship in hip hop. So I've been the booking agent, I've been the manager, I've been a label executive, I've been a promoter as well. Um, so when it came time to book things for the Black History 101 Mobile Museum, I already had that skill set. So for me, I've been lucky because I've been able to do things with the Black History 101 Mobile Museum that a lot of people who actually have collections like I have and do public setups as well, which there's a lot of us around the country who do that. But because of my unique skill set, I've been able to take it further than any other really traveling Black exhibit in history. This Black History 101 Mobile Museum has been to 40 states. Has been over 500 institutions and a variety of institutions, and you won't find any other traveling Black History museum that has done that much traveling across the United States in such diverse institutions and spaces.
Absolutely. That's incredible. And so, with you having had so much history and experience and just knowledge, both lived and learned, um, we are really fortunate to be able to offer our L-Wire 3500 course, which is a special topics course. And the title that we've given it is Preserving Hip Hop Culture. Can you share with us a little bit about how you envision that class being run this fall?
Yes. So thinking about how that class would look, I wanted to be something that first and foremost that highlights um, and gives access to the Michigan Hip Hop Archive material that will be on campus. But doing that through the lens first and foremost of giving people an idea of the impact of hip hop culture um, in not only in America but in the world. So first and foremost, I want to give people the opportunity to learn what hip hop culture is. So we'll be looking probably using some books that are intro level courses. There's a book that Murray Foreman wrote with Mark, not Mark Lamont Hill. Can't remember his name right now, but there's an intro to hip hop book that I want to use. But also, there are a couple of awesome. Actually, let me pull them up here. The visual arts in hip hop, specifically hip hop photography, I think is a great introduction into getting people familiar with um, the books. Can you see that?
Yes, contact high.
Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. Vicky Toback, actually a Michigander, wrote the most popular book in hip hop last year. It's called Contact High. And what she did was she took and studied and documented the contact sheets from photographers throughout hip hop culture, and all of these iconic photographs that we see from hip hop, from Tupac to Eminem to Run DMC to Rakim. These photos that ended up on magazine covers or on album covers that we all know that we're familiar with. Obviously, photographers take hundreds of pictures to get that one shot, and they use contact sheets in order to point out what that one photograph is. So she had
Sure.
access to all these contact sheets. So she wrote this book based upon contact sheets, gave historical context after interviewing these photographers, and it just gives you a deep, in-depth view of hip hop culture, the relevance of the culture, and the importance of the culture and the impact of the culture. So I was thinking that using her book, also using Ernie Panicoli's book,
Yes.
yeah, Hip Hop at the End of the World, would also give another unique example of how people preserve hip hop
Hmm.
through visual means. Um, and it's just a unique way. And these are not like deeply heavy weighted academic books. But for an
Right.
intro course, I think it'll get people really engaged um, and get people started on that path. And so that's a part of it. I also want people to look at Shah Rock's book, Luminary Icon, so we get a historical context from a point of view of a woman who
Mhm.
was there at the very beginning. Um, so that is important as well. I also want to just bring in and use my relationships in the culture to do Skypes or even in-person classroom visits, so students have access to different artists in that type of way too, and then give people an opportunity to actually engage with the material that's in the collection as well, and look at um, how a curator, how an archivist works with primary source material. So I'm still conceptualizing everything, but in a nutshell, it's going to give students just a very unique opportunity to engage material and engage the culture.
Wow, I am excited. And I have to figure out if there's a way for me to either audit that course or just go ahead and enroll in it myself because
Please
there
do.
seems like there's going to be so much. It's going to be
Yeah.
so rich. So
I
talk
think so. I'm really looking forward to it. And I'm not sure if there's another preservation class that's being taught in the country. I mean, this is going to be very unique. Oh, and I guess I need to do a plug too. The other book is The Center of the Movement,
Yes.
of course. And this is a very unique book in that it was the first book to be written on the material culture of hip hop, and actually, it was my master's degree thesis, my capstone project as a student at Western. So I'm actually working on updating it this summer. So the students will have a fresh view of that book as well. It's a very, very unique book. I interviewed some of the top collectors in hip hop culture, and then used a lot of the material that's in the Michigan Hip Hop Archive, is the foundation of that book as well. So there's a lot of connections there.
That is phenomenal. And you keep mentioning this Michigan Hip Hop Archive. And so, for those that don't have the same level of knowledge and that we have about what's about to happen, just share with us what is the Michigan Hip Hop Archive and what are we looking to do with that?
Right. So the Michigan Hip Hop Archive is um, a collection of artifacts that celebrate, document, preserve the rich culture of hip hop in Michigan. Not only looking at those artists, the MCs, the journalists, the promoters, the managers, from hip hop, from a hip hop perspective in Michigan, but also looking at how hip hop culture outside of Michigan has come to Michigan and impacted us. So, for example, a lot of people don't know how many times Tupac came to Michigan, right?
Really?
And through just my research recently, found out that he performed in East Lansing, he performed in Flint, and performed twice so far that we know in Detroit. But you would just figure that he just probably came to Detroit, but that's not true. He came four times that we know of. And one time he was with Digital Underground when he was a dancer. He was a dancer for Digital Underground. So he came as a dancer first, and then
Okay.
came and he because of the relationship he had with MC Breed, they did a couple songs together. MC Breed bought him to Flint, and then students bought him to Michigan State, where he
Okay.
performed. Um, and actually ended up catching a case in East Lansing, which is something that would be interesting for people to research as well, and to critique as well, in terms of Tupac's overall impact. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah, so we're looking at the times that Run DMC came to Michigan and performed. And I talked to Paradise Gray of X Clan recently, and I told him about what I was doing in terms of the Michigan Hip Hop Archive. He was like, "Oh man, we performed." He's like, "X Clan, we performed in Flint, Saginaw." He just ran it down. Big Rapids. Actually, we brought him up to Big Rapids to fairs. But Kalamazoo, he came here, and multiple times in Detroit, and he said that Detroiters were some of their biggest fans, and part of that is because of them sampling George Clinton so much.
Okay.
And Detroit is loving George Clinton, and Detroit and George Clinton's connections to Detroit and Michigan. George Clinton lived in Michigan for years in a place called Brooklyn, Michigan. So Detroiters have a deep, deep love for George Clinton, and that obviously connected to X Clan when they first came out. So yeah, we're looking at so the archive will document all of those types of intersections, um, and we're also working with um, bringing in just different collections from major artists from Detroit, and people who've done some interesting things. There's
Mhm.
one woman by the name of Angela Artis, who was a Tupac fan in the early '90s, and she ended up writing Tupac love letters when he was in prison, and Tupac ended up writing her back. And so I've been in contact with her a few times over the past several months, and she's putting together a box of material that's
Wow.
related to um, her time in this relationship with Tupac. Um, and she actually went to Jersey, went to New York, and met him in prison. Um,
Wow.
so, and she ended up writing a book about her experience. And she told me she sold 300,000 copies of that book. And so but she's a screenwriter now. She's a screenwriting. She's and doing some other things. She lives in Atlanta now, but she's very excited about the Michigan Hip Hop Archive, and actually says she's interested in doing an exhibit where she displays those original letters that she has, and a lot of those letters too. Tupac actually wrote original poetry for her. So she said some of those letters are about 13 pages long or more. Um, and she said he wrote her about 14 times, so she has a lot of material from him. So that's going to be one of the highlights of the archive, having um, not the original letters, but having some of those copies, having
Absolutely.
having some of the other things that she's going to put into the archive as well. Another unique thing she said that she has is the plane ticket that she when she went to New York to meet him. So she's going to give us the plane ticket. So there's yeah, so interesting things like that. But besides her, but there's some um, other promoters in Detroit, photographers in Detroit, journalists in Detroit who are making donations as well. So yeah, we got to be ready to host all of this material. So um, we're it's going to be exciting. Yeah, I think this is going to be a lot larger than any of us imagined.
Mhm.
And if the hip hop movie posters any indication on what the potential and the power of us doing this work is, I mean, we have a very very bright future with it. And it's also unique in the fact that there's only a handful of other universities in the country that actually have hip hop archives. So we're going to be in the same league as Harvard, Cornell, William and Mary, the University of Houston, and a few other colleges being unique in having hip hop archives. But what makes us very unique in relationship to these other campuses is that our archive is very much specific to a region, to a state. Most of these other archives are hip hop in general, although that they might have certain sections of their collections that deal with specific places. Ours is very unique in that it's Michigan, so I'm very happy about that.
This is very exciting. We are really looking forward to being able to get our first installment of the Michigan Hip Hop Archive and really being able to begin just this learning process and this journey. We are truly honored to have you as a partner. We are honored to be able to, we're just honored to be able to be the place. I think that a lot of times, we don't always look at the bigger connection and the greater opportunity that we have when we establish partnerships like this. And I was speaking to one of my students who happens to be of Pakistani descent. And he said that hip hop is what saved him, and hip hop is what kept him in his faith. And he
Mhm.
Muslim, and he said, it's because of hip hop that I am still here. And I was like, wow. And I know that this could be a whole other, rabbit hole that we could go down, I but you just never realize
Mhm.
the impact that hip hop has, that hip hop culture has, that having um, an archive such as this on our campus, how it's going to speak to such a diverse population of students.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's a huge rabbit hole. But and yeah, I hope that we well, a part of having the archive too is not only the archive itself or a class, but it's also looking at the potential for conferences and workshops and things that really bring the archive to life. And also being a Muslim myself, and my wife, both of us, our coming into our faith was very much based in our experience in hip hop. So, which is very interesting. I mean, she was living her experience in Chicago, um, and being exposed to again someone like a Rakim, people like Public Enemy, and I'm having that same experience in Detroit. And then the history of Islam in Michigan and what that means, and the fact that Malcolm X um, was raised in Michigan, and then taking on the name of Detroit Red and all of that, and then coming back to Detroit and being a minister for a short time in Detroit. But his older brother Wilford Little, who got him into Islam and was the minister of Mosque Number One. Growing up on my block, five houses down from me, was a guy by the name of Mr. Little. And I didn't know for my whole life that Mr. Little was Malcolm X's oldest brother. He would have never told you if you didn't ask him.
Wow.
So yes. So and we didn't know until Spike Lee started coming on our block and interviewing him for the movie Malcolm X. And that's when I found out that Mr. Little was actually Wilfred Little. And this guy,
Wow.
I mean, my first 18 years of my life, he was just Mr. Little. And I think part of um, the stigma of being Mr. Little
Hmm.
was being in a neighborhood where most of the people in my neighborhood were Christians, and because of the stigma that people saw of who Malcolm was as a rabble rouser and all of that type of stuff, um, my Christian parents were not telling me, well, you need to go out and sit at the feet of Mr. Little and learn from him because his brother was Malcolm X. I mean, none of the kids, none of my contemporaries, my peers on my block, we ever went down and talked to Mr. Little. Afterwards, we did because we wanted to find more information about Malcolm. But our whole lives, it was a missed opportunity to learn about Malcolm. So, but being here in Kalamazoo, the history of Islam in Kalamazoo is a deep one because it was Malcolm X's teacher, the Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who sent Malcolm's other brother, Filbert, to Kalamazoo to start the mosque here. So,
Really?
yes. So a lot of the older Black Muslims here were students of Wilfred, or his name was Filbert. He was the imam here. He was the imam of the mosque here, or he was a minister early on, but ended up becoming imam. And when Elijah Muhammad's son, Imam Wardin Muhammad, took over, um, this was his mosque. This was his community here. So a lot of there's three or four brothers who are here who were under the leadership of Imam Wardin Muhammad. And then the other Malcolm X connection as well is Malcolm X's mother was
Hmm.
here at the psychiatric hospital here. So Malcolm came to visit her here, as well as his brothers as well. So there's some interesting connections of that here too that we'll intertwine into that conversation in the class
Okay.
and talk about how do you preserve and how does somebody like Malcolm X impact hip hop culture.
Yes.
So yeah, there's some interesting things here as well. So in terms of Malcolm.
Oh my goodness. I mean, I just feel like we could sit here all day. I could sit at your feet and listen and learn all day. But I know that our time is short. So I just thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for just giving us a little glimpse of what's going to be a fantastic L Wire 3500 this fall. I definitely encourage anyone who is looking for a class, whether you're seeking to utilize it toward your degree program, or if you just want to learn really important knowledge and gain some experience that you just won't have anywhere else. I highly suggest that you enroll in this class. Thank you again, Dr. El-Hakim. Congratulations on your doctorate.
Thank you very much. I'm excited about this fall, so I'm looking forward to it.
I'm going to press stop our recording and then I'll come back and talk to you in one moment
Okay.
if I can do that.